The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Sensor arrays can measure a quasar's magnetic field from 12 light-years away. Warp field equations can predict the behavior of subspace anomalies to within a margin of error so small it barely registers on a PDD. The Federation has catalogued over 4 million stellar phenomena, classified 10,000 species, and mapped the better part of 2 galaxies. Science, in the 24th century, is not merely a discipline. It is a religion, and the USS Enterprise D is its cathedral. Which is why, when the rift opened, nobody had a word for it. It began as a distortion 11 kilometers off the port bow, a shimmer in space that Ensign Tate at the science station initially logged as a sensor ghost, a routine artifact of the neutral zone's notoriously unstable subspace geometry. She rechecked her readings, recalibrated the array, ran a level 3 diagnostic. The distortion remained, and it was growing. "Captain?" Her voice was careful, the way young officers learned to be careful when they didn't want to sound alarmed. "I'm reading a localized space-time variance at bearing 27 Mark 4. It's not matching any known phenomenon in the database." Jean-Luc Picard rose from his command chair with the measured calm of a man who had stared down the Borg, negotiated with Q, and survived his own death on a Cardassian prison floor. He moved to the view screen and clasped his hands behind his back. On the screen, the distortion pulsed, a wound in space that caught the distant starlight and bent it wrong, like a mirror that couldn't decide what it was reflecting. "Yellow alert," he said quietly. "Counselor Troy report." Deanna Troi was already gripping her armrest. "I'm sensing." She paused, and the pause itself was alarming, because Deanna Troi did not pause. "I'm sensing 2 distinct emotional presences inside that anomaly, Captain. Not alien. Not mechanical." Another pause. "They feel human. Or close to it. One of them is afraid. The other one." Her brow furrowed. "The other one is determined." The rift tore open without further warning. It was not a gentle phenomenon. The subspace variance spiked to levels that blew out 3 sensor relays on Deck 7 simultaneously. The view screen whited out for exactly 0.4 seconds before the optical filters compensated. When the image resolved, 2 figures were tumbling through open space where nothing had been half a second before, one in blue and red, a cape billowing against the void, and one in a second shade of blue, a white star on his chest, a round shield spinning away from his grip at 300 kilometers per hour. 2 life signs, Data reported, his voice maintaining its characteristic evenness even as his positronic brain processed readings that were refusing to conform to any known biological matrix. Both humanoid. Both in open vacuum. One appears to be a beat, fractional but present. Unaffected by the exposure. "Transporter room 3, Picard said immediately. "Lock on to both figures and beam them directly to sickbay. Full biosafety containment." He turned to Worf at tactical. "Shields up. Full sensor sweep of that rift. I want to know if anything else is coming through." "Aye, Captain." Worf's hands moved across his console, but his eyes stayed on the view screen. The figure in blue and red had righted himself in the vacuum of space with casual, impossible ease, no suit, no environmental support, nothing between him and the killing cold of interstellar space but what appeared to be ordinary fabric. Worf's expression darkened the way it did when he identified something as a threat before he had the intelligence to classify it properly. "Transporter lock is..." He stopped. "Captain, I am having difficulty maintaining a stable lock on the larger subject. His molecular density is fluctuating." "Do it anyway, Mr. Worf. Best lock you can get." The transporter chief earned his pay in the next 6 seconds. Both figures materialized in sickbay behind a Type 4 containment field, the air crackling blue around their outline. Dr. Beverly Crusher was already at her medical tricorder, moving with the focused efficiency of a woman who had treated everything from Beta's neural collapse to Borg nanoprobe infection. She stopped 2 steps from the containment field boundary and looked at her readings. Then she looked at the taller figure, the one who had been breathing vacuum without a suit, who was now standing with his arms loosely at his sides, looking around the sickbay with eyes that were alert and assessing and entirely, maddeningly calm. The other one had retrieved his shield from mid-transport. The device had materialized in his hand as though it had always been there, and was holding it in the ready position that soldiers learn when they wake up in enemy territory and haven't yet decided if they're going to fight their way out. Beverly glanced at her tricorder again, looked back at the taller one. "Captain," she said, and her voice had the quality of a scientist confronting a fact that was personally offensive to everything she knew. "His cellular structure is processing background radiation at a rate that's... I don't even have a unit of measurement for this. His body is doing something with the photonic energy in this room that I've never seen in any species in any database." Picard's voice came through the calm. "Doctor, are they a threat?" Beverly looked at the man with the shield. He had lowered it slightly. He was looking at her with blue eyes that were exhausted and alert in equal measure, and in those eyes was something she had seen before in the eyes of soldiers, of survivors, of people who had been to the edge and knew exactly where it was. "I don't think so," she said. "But Captain..." She checked her tricorder one more time, as though the numbers might have changed. They hadn't. "You should come down here." If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. Picard was already moving. Picard arrived in sickbay with Worf one step behind him, hand resting on his phaser with the practiced restraint of a security chief who wanted very much to use it, and was professional enough not to. Data followed, a tricorder already open, his golden eyes moving between the two contained figures with the undisguised fascination of a mind encountering a genuinely novel problem. The containment field hummed between them. The taller figure, the one Beverly's instruments couldn't adequately measure, stood with his arms crossed now, not defensively but thoughtfully, studying Picard with the same careful attention Picard was giving him. Up close, the suit was extraordinary. Primary colors that had no business looking dignified somehow did. The cape moved slightly despite the absence of any air current, as though it answered to different physical laws than the room around it. The other man had lowered his shield fully. He stood at something that wasn't quite military attention but carried the memory of it, the posture of someone trained to hierarchy who had long since learned when hierarchy deserved his deference, and when it didn't. His eyes moved constantly. Exits. Personnel. The containment field boundary. The equipment he couldn't identify. He was cataloging everything, and he was doing it fast. Picard clasped his hands behind his back. "I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise. You are aboard a Starfleet vessel in Federation space." He paused, letting that establish itself. "You have nothing to fear here. Can you understand me?" The taller figure answered first. His voice was measured, neither aggressive nor submissive, the voice of someone accustomed to being the most capable person in a room who had learned not to lead with it. "We understand you. Universal translator?" Picard's eyebrow rose fractionally. The man knew what a universal translator was, or had deduced it in under 30 seconds. "Among other things, yes. You've encountered translation technology before. Different kind. Same principle." He uncrossed his arms. "My name is Clark Kent. The man next to me is Steve Rogers. We're not your enemy, Captain, and we're not a threat to your crew. We'd like to lower this field if that's agreeable." "That's not agreeable yet," Picard said, with the particular diplomatic firmness he reserved for situations where courtesy and caution needed to occupy the same sentence. "Mr. Kent, our sensors are having considerable difficulty characterizing your biology. I hope you'll understand that we proceed carefully. I'd expect nothing less." Something in Kent's expression shifted, not offense, but recognition. He had dealt with caution before. Had been its subject before. "What do you need from us?" Worf stepped forward before Picard could answer. He was looking at Rogers, specifically at the shield, with an expression that had moved from threat assessment into something more complicated. The shield was a disk of silver-white metal that had survived transport, containment field activation, and the evident stress of whatever had deposited these two men through a tear in space-time without acquiring a single new scratch. Worf knew materials. He knew what held and what broke. "Your weapon," he said. "What is it made of?" Rogers looked at him directly. Held the look for a beat the way men do when they're deciding what kind of conversation they're in. "Vibranium alloy. It's not a weapon exactly. It's a shield. It deflects energy and absorbs kinetic impact. Returns it sometimes." Rogers paused. "You're the security chief." "I am Lieutenant Commander Worf." "You're good at your job. You've been running threat assessment since we materialized, and you've already identified 3 ways to neutralize me if you need to." Rogers said it without accusation. "For what it's worth, you're right about 2 of them." Worf stared at him. Then, slowly, something shifted in the Klingon's bearing, not softening, exactly, but a recalibration. He looked at Picard. Picard gave him nothing, which was its own instruction. Data had not stopped scanning. His tricorder was cycling through configurations that Beverly had given up on 20 minutes ago. "Captain," he said, "I am detecting trace chronoton radiation on both subjects consistent with temporal or dimensional displacement. Additionally, Mr. Kent's cellular structure appears to be actively metabolizing photonic energy from the sickbay lighting. His body is, in effect, converting artificial light into biological energy, though at an efficiency rate approximately 31% below what I calculate his baseline capacity to be." Kent looked at Data with genuine surprise, the first unguarded expression he'd shown. "That's accurate. You determined that in 4 minutes with a handheld scanner?" 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Data corrected pleasantly. "I am an android. My processing speed allows for accelerated analysis. You are not surprised by my nature. I know people who are harder to categorize than you," Kent said. There was warmth in it. Beverly had been quiet, but her expression had been doing considerable work. She lowered her tricorder and addressed Picard directly. "Captain, whatever dimensional variance brought them here, either of them is a biological hazard to the crew. I'd recommend releasing the containment field. It's..." She glanced at Kent. "It's not actually containing the larger subject anyway. He's been politely staying inside it." Picard looked at Kent. Kent said nothing, which was confirmation enough. Picard nodded once. "Drop the field." The blue haze dissipated. Kent stepped forward and extended his hand. Picard shook it, noting with the controlled expression of a diplomat the grip that was being very carefully modulated, the conscious, deliberate restraint in the handshake of a man who could have turned the gesture into something else entirely. Rogers shook hands with Worf. Worf gripped hard, the way Klingon tested. Rogers matched it exactly, not escalating, not yielding. Worf made a sound low in his chest that might, in the right light, have been approval. "We need to talk," Picard said. "All of us. Observation lounge, 15 minutes. He turned toward the door, then stopped. "Mr. Kent. Mr. Rogers. Welcome aboard the Enterprise." He said it the way he said everything, precisely, without excess. "I suspect you'll find we have a great deal to discuss." The observation lounge sat at the saucer section's stern, its curved transparency offering an uninterrupted view of the stars trailing behind the Enterprise like a river of frozen light. It was a room designed for difficult conversations, the kind where the weight of decisions needed somewhere to go besides the people making them. Picard had chosen it deliberately. Kent stood at the window for a long moment before sitting down. Rogers watched him do it, the way teammates watch each other when they're both processing the same impossible situation through different emotional filters. The stars outside were wrong, not catastrophically, not obviously, but wrong in the way a familiar song played in the wrong key was wrong. Kent's eyes moved across the starfield with the telescopic precision of a man reading details no one else in the room could see, and whatever he found there settled something in him that he didn't share aloud. They sat across from Picard, Troy, Data, and Geordi LaForge, who had arrived with an engineering PhD and an expression that oscillated between professional focus and barely contained scientific excitement. Picard began. "I'll be direct. Our sensors confirm you arrived through a dimensional rift bearing the energy signature of a Romulan quantum singularity device. We believe a weapons test conducted near the neutral zone created a resonance cascade that breached the barriers between dimensional realities." He let that settle. "In simpler terms, you were pulled from your own universes by someone else's mistake." Rogers absorbed this without visible reaction. "How far from home are we talking?" "Not distance," Troy said gently. "Dimensional separation. You're not in a distant part of your universe. You're in a fundamentally different one." Rogers nodded slowly, the way soldiers nod when they receive bad news they already suspected. He set his shield against the table's edge. "Can we get back?" "We don't know yet," Picard said. "We're analyzing the rift's residual signature. It remains partially open, which is either an opportunity or a danger, depending on what caused it and whether the Romulans intend to." "The Romulans," Kent said it quietly. "The people who fired the weapon." "Yes." "Are they hostile?" "Complicated," Geordi offered from the end of the table, and the word carried the particular weight of understatement that engineers deploy when the full answer would take 3 hours. "The Romulan Star Empire and the Federation exist in a state of tense non-aggression. There's a neutral zone between our territories. They tested this weapon inside it, which is a violation of the Treaty of Algerin and about 6 other agreements besides." Data had placed his own PDD on the table. "I have been conducting a biological and physiological analysis since your arrival. I hope you will permit me to share my findings, as they have direct bearing on your situation here." Kent gestured for him to proceed. "Mr. Kent," Data began, "your cellular biology is Kryptonian in origin, though I had no reference for that classification until you provided it. Your body processes yellow solar radiation through a mechanism I have no existing framework to fully explain. It converts photonic energy into biological force at an efficiency that exceeds any known organic process by several orders of magnitude." He looked up. "You are, by any scientific metric available to the Federation, operating significantly below your normal capacity aboard this vessel." Kent nodded. "The lighting. The shields." "Correct. The Enterprise's deflector grid scatters incoming radiation across a broad spectrum to protect the hull. This includes the specific wavelengths your physiology relies on most heavily. My calculations suggest you are currently functioning at approximately 78% of your baseline capability." Data paused. "I want to be transparent about that assessment because it seems relevant to your safety and ours." "I appreciate that," Kent said. He meant it. Geordi leaned forward. "Here's what's interesting, and I mean that in the best possible way. If we configured a section of the cargo bay with unfiltered stellar radiation emitters tuned to yellow spectrum output, we could theoretically restore your full capacity." He caught Picard's expression and added quickly, "Or not. That's a conversation for later." Rogers had been listening with the focused patience of a man who absorbed tactical briefings for a living. "What about me?" "Your android said I was reading at full capacity." "You are," Data confirmed. "Your abilities are biologically integrated. The super soldier serum has no external dependency. Your shield's vibrational absorption properties actually interact favorably with the Enterprise's structural resonance frequencies." A pause. "Your weapon is, if anything, slightly more effective in this environment than it would be in standard atmospheric conditions." Rogers looked at Picard. "You're telling me all of this openly. You're not trying to contain information or establish leverage." "No," Picard said simply. "Why?" Picard considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because you are sentient beings displaced from your homes through no fault of your own, and you deserve honesty." Because deception as a first diplomatic tool tends to produce exactly the outcomes one was trying to prevent. He folded his hands on the table. And because, frankly, Mr. Rogers, I suspect you would detect the deception immediately, and we would lose whatever trust we might otherwise have built. Rogers studied him for a long moment. Troy, watching from the side, felt something shift in the emotional presence she'd been monitoring since they'd arrived. Not the determined steel that had been Rogers' dominant register, but something underneath it. Recognition, perhaps. The particular relief of meeting someone who operates by a code similar enough to your own that you don't have to explain it from the beginning. All right, Rogers said. Then I'll be honest too. He glanced at Kent, and something passed between them, not words, but the compressed communication of people who had learned to trust each other under pressure. Kent gave a small nod. Rogers looked back at Picard. Long-range sensors. Whatever you're not saying about what you've already detected, you should say it now. Picard held his gaze. Then he looked at Data. Data set down his PADD. Approximately 40 minutes ago, he said carefully, we detected a Romulan warbird decloaking at the edge of long-range sensor range. It is on an intercept course. Another pause. It is not alone. The warbird's approach changed everything about the conversation. Picard called Yellow Alert from the observation lounge without returning to the bridge, his voice carrying the particular compression of a captain who had learned to make command decisions in any room he happened to be standing in. The lights shifted to their cautionary amber, and the gentle vibration of the Enterprise's systems adjusting to tactical readiness moved through the deck plating like a held breath. How long? Picard asked. At their current speed, Data replied. Approximately 2 hours and 17 minutes to intercept range. The second vessel is a Directive-class warbird. The first is smaller, a Valdor-type escort, fast attack configuration. He paused. Both are running with weapons powered but not charged. They wish to be seen, Captain. This is an approach designed to communicate intent without triggering a response. They want us to know they're coming without wanting us to run, Rogers said. He was studying the starfield through the observation window as though he could see the warbirds himself. That's a containment posture. They're not sure what we have aboard and they don't want to provoke it before they can assess it. Picard looked at him with measured interest. That's a precise tactical read. I've seen it before. Different ships, same psychology. Rogers turned from the window. They fired the weapon that brought us here. Now they want what came through. Us, Kent said. You specifically. Rogers said it without heat, as a tactical fact. Whatever that weapon was designed to do, it tore a hole between dimensions. 2 people fell through. One of them is me, enhanced soldier, useful but comprehensible. The other is you. He nodded toward Kent. And you are not comprehensible. Not to them. Not yet. Which makes you either the most dangerous thing they've ever encountered or the most valuable. Probably both. The silence that followed had the quality of a room recognizing an accurate thing. Picard turned to Troy. She spoke before he could ask. The tactical assessment is consistent with what I'm sensing from the direction of the warbirds. There is anxiety, urgency, and something underneath both of those. She paused, choosing her word carefully. Hunger. The Tal Shiar, Worf said from the doorway. He had not been invited to remain for the briefing and had remained anyway, which Picard permitted because Worf's instincts in situations like this were worth more than protocol. If the weapon test was Tal Shiar sanctioned, they will not negotiate. They will maneuver. Explain the Tal Shiar, Kent said. Romulan intelligence, Picard said. Ruthless, sophisticated, and accustomed to acquiring what they want through methods that bypass conventional diplomacy. He paused. Think of them as an intelligence agency with the authority of a military and the ethics of either. Something moved briefly across Kent's expression. He had, Troy noted, a remarkable capacity for emotional containment, but not a perfect one. The comparison to something in his own experience landed visibly before he filed it away. So they'll try to take me. They'll try to understand you first, Picard said. Then take you? Then we have 2 hours, Rogers said, and the shift in his voice was subtle but complete, the briefing room soldier becoming the field commander, the man who had spent decades turning bad situations into workable ones through the application of clear thinking and stubborn will. What are our options? Picard appreciated the "are" more than he showed. We could retreat to Federation space. The Romulans would be reluctant to follow across the border. An incursion would constitute an act of war. He paused. However, retreating abandons our analysis of the rift, which remains our best option for returning you to your respective dimensions. So we stay, Kent said. There is a second option, Data offered. We could attempt to establish communication with the Romulan vessels and negotiate from a position of transparency. Acknowledge your presence aboard, establish that you are sentient beings under Federation protection, and invoke the relevant articles of the Algeran Treaty regarding the status of displaced persons. Worf made a sound that expressed his opinion of that option without requiring words. The third option, Picard continued, acknowledging Worf's editorial with a slight incline of his head, is to use the time we have to complete Geordi's analysis of the rift signature and attempt a controlled reopening before the Romulans arrive. Rogers shook his head. 2 hours isn't enough time. No, Geordi admitted. It isn't. Not safely. Kent had gone quiet in the way that Troy was learning to recognize. Not withdrawal, but deep processing, the particular stillness of a mind working through variables at a speed that didn't require visible effort. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Captain, before we decide anything, your long-range sensors. What else are they showing you that we haven't discussed yet? Picard met his eyes. The man was perceptive in ways that went beyond the physical. There is a third vessel, he said. It appeared on sensors 8 minutes ago, bearing 224 Mark 7. It is not Romulan. What is it? Rogers asked. Data answered. Its configuration is consistent with a Klingon bird of prey, Brel class. It is running decloaked and has made no aggressive movement. It is, however, matching our speed and heading precisely. He looked up. It has been doing so since before the Romulan vessels appeared on sensors. They were already watching, Rogers said. Yes. Watching the rift or watching us? Data considered. The timing suggests they detected the dimensional breach before the Enterprise did. They may have been monitoring Romulan activity in the neutral zone independently. He paused. Their communications array has been active. They are transmitting on a frequency we do not typically monitor, a frequency associated with a specific Klingon house. Which house? Worf asked, and his voice had changed register entirely. Data looked at him with something that in a human might have been hesitation. House of Martok. Worf straightened. Picard watched him do it. The room waited. Then they are not here to fight, Worf said finally. They are here to witness. General Martok's reputation preceded him like the prow of a warship, displacing everything in its path before the hull arrived. Worf knew the name the way soldiers knew the names of commanders who had earned their legends through blood rather than politics. Martok had fought the Dominion's advanced scouts in skirmishes that Starfleet intelligence was only beginning to piece together. He was not a man who witnessed things passively. Picard ordered the Enterprise to hold position and open a channel to the bird of prey. The response came in 40 seconds, which in Klingon communication protocol meant they had been waiting for it. The viewscreen filled with a face that had been comprehensively rearranged by combat. A prosthetic eye, scars that mapped a career in the particulars of surviving things that killed other people, and an expression of such focused intelligence that the physical damage became irrelevant almost immediately. Martok looked at Picard. Then his single eye moved to Kent and Rogers standing at the edge of the bridge, and something shifted in his bearing that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it. Picard, he said. The word carried the weight of prior history. General Martok. Your presence near the neutral zone is unexpected. The Romulans have been testing weapons near the border for 3 weeks. Martok's voice had the quality of gravel processed through conviction. We have been watching. When their device tore open whatever it tore open. He paused, looking again at Kent and Rogers. We moved closer. Another pause. What are they? They are people, Picard said, with a particular emphasis that meant the philosophical point was non-negotiable. Displaced from their own dimensional reality by the Romulan weapons test. Martok processed this. The larger one. Our sensors cannot get a clean reading on him. That is something we are also working on. Data offered helpfully from the science station. Martok's eye moved to Rogers. Stayed there. That one fought 17 Jem'Hadar in a holosit simulation? The bridge went quiet. Rogers looked at the screen steadily. I haven't been on your ship, General. No. But our tactical computer ran a threat projection the moment you materialized on the Enterprise. Something that might have been the Klingon equivalent of appreciation moved across Martok's face. 17. Before projected combat degradation. With the shield. He said the word shield the way Klingons said the names of weapons they respected. Our projections are usually conservative. Rogers said nothing, which Troy noted was precisely the right response. General, Picard said, steering the conversation with practiced diplomatic navigation. The Romulan vessels will reach intercept range in under 2 hours. I would value your assessment of their intentions. Their intentions are what Tal Shiar intentions always are. Martok said flatly. Acquisition. They created an accident, and now they wish to own what the accident produced. His eye moved back to Kent. Particularly that one. Our sensors show energy readings consistent with. He stopped. Visibly reconsidered his phrasing. Consistent with something the Romulans would very much prefer not to be in Federation hands. He is not in anyone's hands, Picard said. No, Martok agreed. Not yet. He let the implication of yet occupy the space between them without apologizing for it. Picard. The Klingon Empire has no formal interest in this situation. I am here as a commander who prefers to understand what is happening near Klingon territory before it becomes a problem he is solving from behind. He leaned forward slightly. But I will tell you this freely, the Romulans on those ships are Tal Shiar, not military. Commander Torath commands the lead warbird. He is not a soldier. He is a collector. The channel closed. Martok had said what he came to say. Picard turned to the bridge. Analysis. Martok is positioning himself as an observer with options, Rogers said. He had moved to stand near the tactical station, not touching anything, but oriented toward the information displays with the instinct of a man who needed to see the full tactical picture to think properly. He's not committing to us or against us. He's watching to see what we do. Klingon respect decisive action, Worf confirmed. If we respond to the Romulans with strength and clarity, Martok will factor that into whatever calculation he is running. Ken had been standing at the edge of the conversation, listening. He stepped forward now. Captain? I want to understand something before the Romulans arrive. His voice was measured but carried an undertone that Troy identified as the compression of something that needed to be said before it became harder to say. Your prime directive. Picard turned to face him fully. He had been expecting this. On our way to the bridge, I used my vision to skim through the ship's hull. Kent held Picard's gaze directly. Deck 12 starboard section. Your long-range sensors are showing me what your tactical display isn't. A planet, pre-warp civilization, M-class, approximately 4 light-years from our current position. There are Romulan energy signatures on the surface. Not weapons. Mining equipment. And life sign readings that are. He paused. Inconsistent with a voluntary workforce. The bridge was very quiet. We're aware of the planet, Picard said. Then you know what's happening there. We have suspicions. I have confirmation. Kent's voice remained even, but the evenness was doing considerable work. Captain, those people need help. Right now. Today. Not after diplomatic consultations or treaty negotiations or... Mr. Kent. Picard's voice was not harsh, but it was final in the way that bulkheads were final. Not aggressive, simply immovable. What you are describing is governed by the Prime Directive. The non-interference with developing civilizations is not a suggestion or a guideline. It is the foundational principle upon which the Federation's ethical framework rests. With respect, Captain, Kent began. I know, Picard said. And the quiet exhaustion in those two words stopped Kent entirely, because it was not the dismissal of someone who didn't understand. It was the admission of someone who understood completely and had chosen anyway. The weight of that choice filled the bridge like a fourth presence. The argument didn't end. It suspended, the way certain arguments do when external pressure makes continuation a luxury neither party can afford, but neither party has conceded anything. Kent stood at the viewport for a long moment after Picard's admission, looking at the stars in the direction of the planet he could see and the crew around him could not, and Rogers watched him do it with the expression of a man who had been in that position himself. Who had stood in front of authority he respected and felt the grinding friction between what the rules said and what his eyes were telling him. Rogers had fought that war his entire career. He had lost it sometimes. Won it others. He had learned, painfully and over decades, that the difference between those outcomes usually came down to timing, method, and the quality of the allies you chose. He crossed the bridge and stood beside Kent at the viewport. He spoke quietly enough that the conversation was nominally private, though on a starship bridge with Vulcan hearing ranges and android auditory processing, privacy was largely a courtesy extended by those who chose not to listen. We don't have enough information yet, Rogers said. I have enough. You have what your eyes tell you. You don't have context. You don't know how long they've been there, what agreements may or may not exist, what the consequences of intervention look like 6 months from now. He paused. Neither do I. And we're guests on this ship. Kent turned to look at him. You agree with the Prime Directive? I agree that we don't burn the house down before we understand the floor plan. Rogers held his gaze. Give it time. Work the problem from inside the system first. If the system fails, he left the rest unspoken. They both understood the rest. Kent turned back to the stars. After a moment, he nodded. It was not agreement with the principle. It was agreement with the approach. The distinction mattered, and Rogers understood it. Picard, who had been conducting a quiet conversation with Worf at the tactical station, crossed the bridge toward them. Mr. Kent, I want you to understand something. He stopped beside them, joining them at the viewport without making it a confrontation. I have stood where you are standing more times than I can count. I have watched suffering I had the power to prevent and chosen not to act because the architecture of a principle I believe in demanded restraint. His voice was quiet and carried no defensiveness. I will not pretend that choice is clean or comfortable. It is not. It is the most difficult aspect of command I have ever encountered. Kent looked at him. But you still make it. I still make it. Picard paused. Because I have also seen what happens when beings of extraordinary capability decide that their judgment supersedes the rights of civilizations to develop their own destiny. The road from intervention to dependency to subjugation is shorter than it appears from the beginning. He held Kent's gaze. I am not saying you are wrong about what you see. I am saying that the method by which we address it matters as much as the addressing. The calm interrupted them. Worf's voice carried the particular frequency he reserved for things that had just gotten worse. Captain, the lead Romulan warbird is hailing us. On screen. Commander Torath materialized on the view screen with the composed stillness of a man who had rehearsed this conversation. He was younger than Martok's description had suggested, sharp-featured, with the characteristic Romulan brow and the particular brand of Tal-Shir composure that wore courtesy like a coat that could be removed at any moment. His eyes moved immediately to Kent and Rogers and stayed there with the focused attention of a collector appraising something he had already decided to acquire. Captain Picard, he said. I trust you are well, Commander Torath. Picard's tone was courteous and precisely as warm as the situation warranted, which was not very. Your weapons test in the neutral zone caused a dimensional breach. 2 sentient beings were displaced as a result. I assume you're calling to address that. I'm calling to facilitate a resolution, Torath said smoothly. The individuals you have aboard are the inadvertent result of an experiment that is the property of the Romulan Star Empire. We would like to ensure their safe transfer to our... They are not property, Picard said. The words were quiet and contained a complete absence of flexibility. Torath paused. Adjusted. Of course. I misspoke. We would like to offer our facilities to assist in their return to their dimensional point of origin. Romulan quantum singularity research is the most advanced in the quadrant. We are uniquely positioned to. Your research is what created their displacement, Rogers said from across the bridge. Torath looked at him with the particular attention a chess player gives to a piece that has just moved unexpectedly. You are direct. I find it saves time. Something flickered in Torath's expression, not anger, but recalibration. His eyes moved back to Kent. And you? Our sensors indicate you are operating below your normal capacity aboard a Starfleet vessel. We can offer an environment specifically configured to your physiological requirements. He let the implication settle with the practiced patience of a man who understood that the best offers were the ones that didn't need to be explained. Full capacity restoration. Complete physiological support. In exchange for... No, Kent said. The word was simple and left no room for the conversation Torath had prepared. You haven't heard. I don't need to. Kent's voice remained even. You fired a weapon that tore a hole between dimensions, pulled 2 people out of their lives, and now you're offering to help us, in exchange for something. That's not assistance. That's leverage. He paused. And I've dealt with people who lead with leverage before. The conversation doesn't improve from here. Torath was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the courtesy had thinned slightly, the coat showing its lining. Captain Picard. The Treaty of Algerin covers a great many things. It does not cover dimensional anomalies or the beings that emerge from them. I would encourage you to consider your position carefully before. Commander. Picard's voice was the diplomatic equivalent of a door closing. We will be in touch. He nodded to Worf. The channel closed. The bridge exhaled collectively. He'll move to intercept, Rogers said immediately. He's not going back to his superiors without something. That offer was a formality. He knew we'd decline it. Agreed, Worf said, with the satisfaction of a security chief whose threat assessment had been validated. Then we have less than 2 hours, Geordi said from the engineering station. And I have an idea about the rift that I need 45 minutes and Mr. Kent's cooperation to test. He looked at Kent directly. Specifically, I need to know if a Kryptonian's sensory capability can do what our sensors can't. Kent looked at him. What do you need me to see? Everything, Geordi said. Starting with the thing inside the rift that our instruments keep telling us isn't there. The thing inside the rift wasn't supposed to be there. Geordi had flagged it as a sensor artifact 3 hours ago, a recurring anomalous reading that appeared at irregular intervals in the dimensional breach's energy signature, lasting between 0.3 and 0.7 seconds before disappearing back into the background noise. The computer had classified it as interference. Geordi's visor had told him something different, which was why he trusted his visor over the computer in situations where the computer was being too reasonable about unreasonable data. He set up the analysis in cargo bay 2, converting the space into a makeshift sensor array with the particular improvised efficiency that characterized Enterprise engineering solutions. Equipment pulled from 3 different departments, reconfigured in ways that the original designers had not intended but would probably have approved of. Kent stood at the center of it, which was the entire point. Your vision operates across the full electromagnetic spectrum, Geordi said, making final adjustments to a modified sensor cluster. Our instruments work on the same principle, but they're filtered. They're designed to interpret, not just receive. They're making decisions about what's worth registering. He looked up. I need unfiltered perception. I need someone who sees everything and lets me decide what matters. Kent studied the equipment with the focused attention he gave to most things, complete, unhurried, searching for the detail that explained the whole. Walk me through what you're looking for. The rift has a consistent energy signature except for these intervals where something registers and then vanishes. The pattern isn't random. It's rhythmic. Regular enough to be intentional, irregular enough that the computer keeps dismissing it. Geordi pulled up the timing sequence on a PADD and handed it to Kent. Look at the rift, and tell me what's producing that pattern. Kent looked at the cargo bay wall. Through it, through the hull, through 40 kilometers of empty space, to the dimensional breach hanging in the void like a scar that hadn't decided whether to heal or widen. His eyes made no visible change. That was the part Geordi found most remarkable. The process was entirely internal, no physical indication of the extraordinary sensory machinery operating behind those entirely ordinary-looking eyes. There's a structure, Kent said after a moment. Inside the rift. On the dimensional boundary itself, not in our space and not in whatever space is on the other side. In the membrane between them. He paused, refining. It's geometric. Regular angles, repeating patterns. It's not natural. Geordi's hands went still on his console. Artificial. Yes. Romulan construction? Kent was quiet for longer this time. No. The energy signature is different from the warbirds. Much older. The materials are. He stopped. Geordi. There's writing on it. The cargo bay was very quiet. What kind of writing? Geordi asked carefully. I don't know the language. But the structure it's on, it's a device. It was already there before the Romulans fired their weapon. The weapon didn't create the breach. Kent turned to look at Geordi directly. It activated something that was already built into the dimensional boundary. Something that was waiting. Geordi sat down on an equipment crate because his legs had made that decision independently. Waiting for what? I don't know yet. Kent looked back through the hull. But whatever it is, it just noticed that I was looking at it. They were back on the bridge in 4 minutes. The timing was not ideal. Worf had been tracking a new development with the focused intensity of a man watching several bad situations converge into one worse one, and he delivered his report with the compressed efficiency of someone who had too much information and not enough time. The Borg probe had appeared on long-range sensors 22 minutes ago. It had been classified initially as debris. Its energy signature was irregular, its trajectory passive. Data had reclassified it 11 minutes ago when it altered course. Minimally. Just enough to no longer be debris. A probe, Rogers said. Not a cube. Correct, Data said. A Class 4 Borg probe. Crew complement of approximately 11 drones. Weapons capability significantly below a standard cube. He paused. However, its sensor array is disproportionately large for its size. It is not here to fight. It is here to gather information. About the rift, Picard said. About Mr. Kent, Data corrected, with the gentle precision of an android who understood that accuracy mattered more than comfort. The probe altered course at the precise moment Mr. Kent began his sensory analysis in the cargo bay. It is responding to his biological energy output. He turned to face the bridge fully. The Borg have detected a biological organism processing electromagnetic radiation at an efficiency level they have never encountered. To the collective Mr. Kent represents something worth assimilating, Worf finished. Something worth understanding first, Data said. Then assimilating. Kent had absorbed this with the stillness that Troy had come to recognize as his processing mode. How long before it's in range? At current speed, 51 minutes, Data said. However, he paused in a way that had become familiar enough to the bridge crew to function as its own kind of alarm. The probe is transmitting. It has been transmitting since it altered course. Whatever it has observed about Mr. Kent is already part of the collective's knowledge base. So the cube is coming, Rogers said. Cubes, Worf said. Plural. Long-range sensors are showing. He checked his display. Unclear. The readings at extreme range are ambiguous. But the subspace distortion patterns are consistent with vessels traveling at high warp on an intercept trajectory. Picard stood at the center of his bridge with 3 simultaneous threats on his sensors: Romulan warbirds closing from the neutral zone, a Borg probe already within medium range, and whatever Geordi and Kent had just found inside the dimensional rift itself. And he did what captains do when the situation exceeds any single response. He made a decision about which problem to solve first. Mr. Data? The structure Mr. Kent identified inside the rift. I want everything we can determine about its origin, its function, and who built it. Priority 1. He turned. Mr. LaForge, I want options for rift stabilization that don't require 2 hours. Find me something that requires 40 minutes. He turned again. Mr. Worf, tactical analysis of engagement scenarios if the Romulans and the Borg arrive simultaneously. I want to know if there's a version of that situation where they target each other instead of us. There is, Rogers said. Everyone looked at him. He was studying the tactical display with the expression of a man reading a battlefield. If we position correctly and time the communications right, you can make the Romulans look like the more interesting target. He glanced at Worf. How fast can you make a Romulan warbird look like it's moving toward a Borg probe? Worf stared at him. Then looked at his console. Then looked back. That is either a very good idea or a catastrophic one. In my experience, Rogers said, those are usually the same idea at different points in the timeline. Kent had returned to the viewport. He was looking at the rift. It's not waiting anymore, he said quietly. Nobody asked what he meant. The lights flickered once across the entire ship, every deck, every console, every display, and then steadied. Data looked at his instruments with an expression that android faces were not designed to produce but produced anyway. The structure inside the rift, he said, is powering up. The power fluctuation lasted 1.3 seconds and touched every system on the Enterprise simultaneously: life support, propulsion, weapons, the replicators on Deck 9, the holodecks, the medical bay's biomonitors. Not damaging. Not disabling. A contact. The way a hand pressed flat against a wall to feel the vibration of what was on the other side. Report, Picard said. All systems nominal. Data replied, and the speed of the response indicated he had been monitoring for exactly this. The energy pulse originated from the structure inside the rift and propagated through subspace rather than conventional space. It passed through our shields without interaction. He looked up. It was not an attack. The pulse was informational. It was reading us. It scanned the entire ship in 1.3 seconds, Geordi said from his station, and the engineering outrage in his voice was genuine. Through our shields. Through our hull. Every system simultaneously. He shook his head. Whatever built that thing, they were a long way ahead of us. Ahead of the Romulans too, Kent said. He was still at the viewport, but his attention had shifted, no longer looking at the rift but at the Romulan warbirds on the tactical display. The lead warbird just changed course. Minor adjustment, but they felt that pulse. They know something happened. Torath will assume we triggered it, Rogers said. Yes, Picard agreed. Which means our window for controlling the narrative of this situation just shortened considerably. He moved to his command chair with the purposeful economy of a man converting thought into action. Data. What can you tell me about the structure's origin? Data had been building his analysis since Kent's report from the cargo bay, cross-referencing the described geometry and energy signature against the Enterprise's archaeological database, the Daystrom Institute's records, and 3 separate Federation xenological archives. He delivered his findings with the characteristic precision of a mind that understood that partial information delivered accurately was more useful than complete information delivered with false confidence. The geometric patterns Mr. Kent described are consistent with no known space-faring civilization in the Federation database, he said. However, there are partial matches. Fragments of similar mathematical architecture found in 3 separate archaeological sites across the Alpha and Beta quadrants. He paused. All 3 sites predate the oldest known space-faring civilization in this region by approximately 200,000 years. The bridge absorbed this. Someone built a device in the dimensional membrane 200,000 years ago, Rogers said. And the Romulans accidentally turned it on, Geordi added. That would suggest, Data continued, that the dimensional breach is not a malfunction of the Romulan weapon. It is the intended function of the ancient device. The Romulan weapon provided the activation energy. The breach was designed. Designed to do what? Troy asked. Unknown. But the pulse that just passed through this vessel was consistent with a targeting scan. Data let the words sit. The device is not passively open. It is actively selecting. Kent turned from the viewport. Selecting for what criteria? That, Data said, is what we do not yet know. The Borg probe moved before anyone had finished processing Data's analysis. It had been holding at medium range with the patient, terrible stillness of a predator that had already decided on its moment, and its moment was now. It accelerated on a direct intercept course with the Enterprise, and simultaneously a cutting beam lanced out from its forward array with the Borg's characteristic lack of preamble or warning. Not toward the ship. Toward Kent. The beam passed through the Enterprise's shields as though they were a suggestion rather than a defensive system, not because shields were ineffective against Borg technology in general, but because this beam was not a weapons discharge. It was a retrieval mechanism. Precisely calibrated, specifically targeted, carrying the unique resonance frequency of Kent's biological energy signature that the collective had spent the last 50 minutes analyzing. Kent stepped aside. The beam adjusted. He moved again, faster. It adjusted again, faster. The exchange lasted approximately 2 seconds before Kent stopped moving, stood completely still, and looked at the probe on the view screen with an expression that had shed the careful modulation he had maintained since his arrival and replaced it with something older and quieter and considerably more absolute. "Captain," he said. "Permission to go outside." Picard looked at him. Understood immediately what he was asking and what it meant. "Mr. Kent, they're trying to take a sample. As long as I'm on this ship they'll keep trying, and that beam is passing through your shields. Your crew is not safe while I'm aboard." He said it without drama, as a tactical assessment. "Let me draw them away from the Enterprise. I can handle a probe. At 78% capacity," Worf said. 78% is sufficient for an 11-drone probe," Kent said, and there was no arrogance in it. Just arithmetic. Rogers had moved to the tactical station and was running his own analysis with Worf. The two of them had developed a functional working language in the past several hours that operated on the shared frequency of people who thought in terms of fields of fire and defensive perimeters. If he goes out, the probe follows. That pulls it away from the Enterprise, but it also pulls it toward the rift. He looked at Picard. "Which is where the ancient device is. Which just ran a targeting scan." "You're suggesting the device may react to Mr. Kent's proximity," Data said. "I'm suggesting we don't know what the device does and we're about to send the person it apparently pulled through a dimensional breach directly toward it." Rogers kept his voice even. "That seems like information worth having before we commit." "We don't have time to get it," Kent said. The cutting beam pulsed again, a second attempt, this one broader, sweeping. It missed Kent and passed through the port bulkhead, disintegrating a section of conduit behind it. From somewhere below, an alarm began. "Decision time, Captain." Picard made it in the space between one breath and the next, the way command decisions were actually made, not with deliberation but with the compressed weight of every relevant consideration arriving simultaneously and resolving into a single vector. "Go," he said. "But you don't approach the rift. You draw the probe away from it, toward the Romulan position." He turned to Worf. "Execute Mr. Rogers' tactical maneuver. Make Torath look interesting to that probe. Back to Kent. And Mr. Kent." "I know," Kent said. He was already moving toward the airlock. "Full capacity," Picard said. "Geordi, open the bay doors on Deck 4 and reconfigure the external emitters to yellow spectrum output." Geordi looked at him. "You want to restore his power?" "I want to send him out there at 100%, Picard said. "Whatever is in that rift pulled him here for a reason. When he finds out what that reason is..." He paused. "I want him to be ready for it." The bay doors opened. Kent stepped into the void. Behind him, every external emitter on the Enterprise's saucer section flooded the surrounding space with unfiltered yellow spectrum radiation, and something in the starfield shifted, a change so subtle the sensors almost missed it, a brightening that had nothing to do with local stellar activity. On the viewscreen, Superman flew toward the Borg probe at a speed that made the Enterprise's warp drive look patient. He had forgotten what it felt like. Not the power itself, that was always present, a constant beneath everything, the hum of a sun absorbed and converted and stored in every cell simultaneously. What he had forgotten was the absence of limitation. The moment the Enterprise's emitters reached him, the effect was immediate and total. Like a door opening in a room he hadn't realized was a room until the walls disappeared. The filtered, partial, carefully rationed energy that had been sustaining him for the past several hours was replaced in seconds by the full unobstructed output of yellow spectrum radiation, and Clark Kent became, without ceremony or transition, entirely himself. He hit the Borg probe at approximately half his maximum speed because half was sufficient, and he was not, despite what the moment invited, inclined toward excess. The probe was 11 drones and a cutting beam and a sensor array that had spent 50 minutes cataloging his biology with the collective's characteristic thoroughness. It was also, from a structural standpoint, not designed for an impact of this nature. The forward array, the source of the cutting beam, ceased to function after the first contact. The probe's propulsion system ceased to function after the second. The 11 drones inside experienced a third contact that was considerably more difficult to classify in standard engineering terms, but was comprehensively effective. The entire engagement lasted 19 seconds. He held the disabled probe at arm's length in the vacuum of space and looked at it with the particular expression of a man who had just done something efficiently, and was already thinking about the next problem. Through the Enterprise's hull, at this distance, he could see the bridge, Geordi at his station, Rogers and Worf running their tactical scenario, Picard standing at the center of everything with his hands clasped behind his back and his attention on the probe and the rift simultaneously. A captain watching two problems at once, which was the minimum number of problems available. On the tactical display Rogers and Worf had configured, the Romulan warbirds were reacting exactly as predicted. The maneuver was elegant in the way that Rogers' best ideas were elegant. Not complicated, but precise. Worf had opened a narrow-band subspace transmission on a frequency the Romulans monitored but weren't supposed to know that Starfleet knew they monitored, and the transmission contained sensor data from the Enterprise that looked like internal communication but read, to Romulan intelligence software, as something more interesting. Specifically, it read as Starfleet's assessment that the disabled Borg probe contained intact Borg tactical data that Torath could not allow Federation analysts to recover. Commander Torath moved his warbird toward the probe's last position before the transmission had finished transmitting. The Borg probe, naturally, was no longer there. Ken had moved it. What Torath found instead was a Borg cutting beam residue signature, an Enterprise that had repositioned 3,000 kilometers closer to the rift, and a human being floating in open vacuum holding 11,000 tons of Borg technology under one arm who looked at the Romulan warbird with an expression that communicated, across all species barriers and diplomatic protocols. A clear and unambiguous message about the current hierarchy of the situation. Torath hailed the Enterprise immediately. Picard let him wait 40 seconds before answering. The diplomatic exchange that followed was brief and conducted in the particular register that Romulan commanders used when they were recalculating without wanting to appear to be recalculating. Torath was good. He recovered his composure within 2 sentences, redirected his opening position smoothly, and pivoted to a new offer that was structurally different from his first one in every superficial way and identical to it in every substantive way. Picard declined it with the same quiet finality as before. Torath closed the channel. "He'll try something else," Rogers said. "He will," Picard agreed. "But he needs time to decide what. We have a window." It closed faster than any of them anticipated. The ancient device activated without warning, no preliminary pulse, no targeting scan, no 1.3-second contact across every system. It simply opened, fully and completely, in the way that things built 200,000 years ago by civilizations that didn't leave instruction manuals opened, without explanation and without apology. The dimensional rift expanded from its stable diameter of 40 meters to 600 meters in under 3 seconds, and the energy output that accompanied the expansion hit Kent in open space like a physical force, staggering him in the void, the Borg probe tumbling from his grip. Through the hull of the Enterprise he heard Geordi's voice on the open comm channel. "Clark, the device is drawing power from the rift itself. It's using the breach as a fuel source. If it reaches full activation, the rift becomes permanent," Kent said. "Worse. The dimensional membrane destabilizes completely. We're not talking about a hole between universes. We're talking about the boundary itself dissolving." A pause filled with the sound of Geordi working faster than was strictly safe. "Every dimension in contact with this one starts bleeding into each other. The physics don't survive that. Not here. Not in your universe. Not anywhere connected to this breach point." Ken looked at the device through 600 meters of expanding dimensional energy. It was visible now to normal human eyes. A structure of dark geometric angles that caught and bent the light of local space, vast and patient, and entirely indifferent to the biological organisms clustered around it arguing about what to do. It was the work of minds that had been finished with their project for 200 millennia and hadn't needed to think about it since. He thought about the planet for light years away. The Romulan mining equipment. The workforce that wasn't voluntary. He thought about Roger's voice in the observation lounge. Work the problem from inside the system first. He thought about Picard's face when he said "I know," the exhausted, honest admission of someone who carried the weight of a principle that cost something real to maintain. Then he stopped thinking and started moving. The device had been built in the dimensional membrane. In the space between spaces, accessible from either side without crossing the boundary between them. Which meant that reaching it required passing through the rift itself. Through the breach between universes. Through the dimensional membrane and into the boundary layer where the ancient geometry waited. In his own universe he had flown through the cores of stars. He had held tectonic plates together with his bare hands. He had absorbed the full output of a red sun and kept moving. None of that was precisely applicable here. But all of it was relevant in the way that experience is always relevant, not as a template but as evidence that the range of survivable things was wider than it looked from the outside. He hit the rift at full speed. The transition was not like anything he had a reference for. The dimensional membrane was not space and not the absence of space. It was the condition that made space possible, and passing through it felt like passing through the definition of a word rather than the word itself. His powers flickered. His vision went to static across every spectrum simultaneously. His strength dropped in a way that had no physical analog. Not weakness exactly, but a temporary uncertainty about what the rules were. The device was directly ahead. Up close, the writing on it was clear, mathematical notation rather than language, a set of instructions or perhaps a dedication, carved into material that had no business existing in the space it occupied by a civilization that had understood dimensions the way the Federation understood warp fields. His hands found the primary structure. He felt the power cycling through it. Enormous, ancient, building toward a threshold that the Enterprise's sensors had calculated at 4 minutes and 30 seconds away. He began to work. Behind him, through the membrane, he could feel the Enterprise holding position. Rogers coordinating the defense. Picard watching. The Romulans deciding. The distant subspace distortion of Borg vessels still hours away but no longer irrelevant. He had 4 minutes and 30 seconds and 100% capacity, and 200,000 years of ancient engineering to dismantle with his bare hands. He had worked with worse. The device did not want to stop. That was the first thing Kent understood when his hands found the primary structure. Not resistance in the mechanical sense, not a lock or a seal or a failsafe, but the particular inertia of a system that had been building toward its purpose for 200,000 years and had no conception of why something would want to interrupt it. It was not hostile. It was simply committed, the way gravity was committed, the way time was committed, and working against that kind of commitment required something beyond strength. It required understanding. He pressed his palms flat against the geometric surface and looked, not with his eyes but with everything, the full sensory apparatus of a Kryptonian operating at complete capacity in a space that existed between the rules rather than inside them. The mathematics carved into the surface resolved slowly into something he could follow, not translate but trace, the way you could follow the logic of a proof without speaking the language it was written in. The device was not a weapon. It had never been a weapon. It was a door. Built by a civilization that had moved between dimensions the way the Enterprise moved between star systems, a transit mechanism for beings who no longer existed to use it, still cycling through its activation sequence because no one had ever told it the journey was over. 200,000 years of waiting for passengers who were never coming. Something in that landed with a weight that had nothing to do with the immediate situation and everything to do with it simultaneously. He found the primary power coupling at the structure's geometric center, a node where 8 angles converged in a configuration that shouldn't have been stable but was, maintained by dimensional mechanics that operated outside conventional physics. He wrapped both hands around it, and pulled with the specific quality of force that the last 4 minutes of working the structure had taught him, not brute pressure but a resonant counterforce, matching the device's own frequency and inverting it. The device resisted for 11 seconds. Then it yielded. Not explosively, not catastrophically. It yielded the way old things yield when they finally receive permission to stop. The power cycling through the structure decelerated in stages, each geometric angle releasing its stored energy in sequence, the mathematical notation on the surface dimming section by section as 200,000 years of accumulated purpose discharged harmlessly into the dimensional membrane around him. The rift began to contract. 600 meters became 400. 400 became 150. 150 became 40, and then smaller, and then the membrane closed around the device like water closing over a stone, and the ancient geometry settled into stillness for the first time since a Romulan weapons test had woken it from its long sleep. Kent hung in the dimensional boundary for a moment in the complete silence of a space that existed between existences, and then the membrane released him back into normal space with the same lack of ceremony with which it had accepted him, and the stars of the Star Trek universe reappeared around him, familiar now in their wrongness, and the Enterprise was exactly where he had left it, holding position with the steadiness of a ship whose captain didn't move when he said he wasn't going to move. He flew back slowly. Rogers met him at the airlock with a look that communicated everything efficiently and said nothing aloud until the bay doors had closed and the atmosphere had cycled and the sound of the ship had returned around them, the hum of the warp core, the distant sound of a crew that had been holding its breath and was now, carefully, beginning to exhale. "Device?" Rogers said. "Dormant. The rift is closed." Kent paused. "The Romulans?" Torath withdrew when the rift closed. Whatever his mandate was, it required the breach to be active. Rogers leaned against the bulkhead. Martok hailed us. Apparently watching a human being fly into a dimensional membrane and come back out carrying a deactivated ancient artifact is the kind of thing that generates favorable opinions in certain Klingon command structures. And the Borg? Still coming. Slower now. Data thinks the probe going offline disrupted their immediate tactical assessment. They're recalculating. Rogers paused. We have time. Kent nodded. Looked at the closed bay doors. Through them, through the hull, for light years away, a planet with Romulan mining equipment and a workforce that wasn't voluntary, still exactly where it had been when the rift opened and when it closed and during every moment between those two events. Still there. Still unchanged. The prime directive, he said. Still in effect, Rogers said. Not unkindly. I know. Kent was quiet for a moment. I understand it better now. I don't agree with all of it, but I understand it. He looked at Rogers. That's not the same as doing nothing. No, Rogers agreed. It isn't. Picard received them in the observation lounge with the quiet ceremony of a man who understood that certain conversations required a room with a view of the stars. He had ordered tea. Earl Grey, which Rogers tried with the polite stoicism of a man who had survived worse, and he let the silence establish itself before he spoke. The rift is closed, he said. The dimensional membrane appears stable. Our preliminary analysis suggests the ancient device is fully dormant. He paused. Which means the mechanism that brought you here no longer exists. The sentence settled over the table with the weight of its full implication. You can't send us home, Kent said. Not through the rift, Picard said. Not yet. But the device's power discharge left residual dimensional variance readings that Data believes contain navigational data. Effectively, the coordinates of the universes the device was designed to connect. He held their attention carefully. He believes, with sufficient time and resources, those coordinates could be used to construct a targeted dimensional transit. Not through a breach, but through a controlled aperture. How long? Rogers asked. Months, Picard said. Perhaps longer. Rogers absorbed this with the particular quality of stillness he brought to information he didn't like and couldn't change. Kent looked out at the stars. In the meantime, Picard continued, you are welcome aboard this ship. As guests. As individuals under Federation protection. He paused. And if you are willing, as advisors. What you both did today, the tactical thinking, the dimensional analysis, the decision to address the device directly. These are not small contributions. The Federation will be dealing with the implications of that ancient structure for years. He looked between them. Your perspectives have value here. Rogers looked at Kent. Something passed between them, the compressed communication of two people from different universes who had spent the last several hours learning each other's frequency. There's a planet, Kent said to Picard. For light years from here. I understand why you can't send a Starfleet vessel. I understand the prime directive. He held Picard's gaze. But I am not Starfleet. Picard was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that it wasn't a refusal. No, he said finally. You are not. Outside, the stars held their positions, ancient, indifferent, full of distance and possibility in equal measure. Two men from other universes sat in a room designed for difficult conversations and looked at a galaxy that was not theirs and considered what it meant to be responsible to principles larger than the rules written around them. In the darkness near the neutral zone, a Klingon bird of prey held its position, watching. In the depths of the Beta Quadrant, a Borg cube adjusted its course. On a planet 4 light-years away, something was about to change. Two heroes from impossible distances had collided with a universe governed by science and reason, and neither had emerged unchanged. Clark Kent had arrived as a god operating at diminished capacity, and left as something more useful, a being who understood that power without wisdom was just force wearing a cape. Steve Rogers had walked into a galaxy of alien politics and ancient mysteries and done what he always did, found the human center of an inhuman situation and stood on it. The Federation would spend years analyzing the ancient device's residual data, 200,000 years of dimensional cartography, the legacy of a civilization so advanced it had moved between universes like changing rooms. The Tal Shiar would file reports that raised questions their superiors preferred not to answer. Martok would tell the story in the way Klingon told stories worth repeating. The Borg would recalculate. And somewhere between the regulations and the principles, between the prime directive and the conscience it sometimes strained against, a Kryptonian who was not bound by Starfleet's rules flew toward a planet where people needed help, and a supersoldier stayed aboard the Enterprise planning how to make sure the help lasted beyond the moment of giving it. The universe, it turned out, was large enough for more than one kind of hero. Whether that was enough, that remained, as the best questions always do, unanswered. Live long and prosper. Hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories. Thank you for watching.